Yuta and Hakari have been the subject of many debates in Jujutsu Kaisen over the years. Ever since their appearances in a flashback of Gojo's, the question has come up time and time again of how strong Hakari really is, which I do have a video on. And if Yuta and Hakari were to go all out, who would really win? Are Yuta and Hakari really on the same level? And if so, how would they compete against each other in a fight to the death? Right off the bat, Yuta and Hakari are portrayed as equals in terms of raw strength, and though it's not ever stated, it is heavily implied by the numerous conversations about them from other characters. From Yuta outright saying that he and Hakari are on similar levels when they're at their best, to Hakari also being a character that's relevant in stopping Kenjaku from taking over Japan with the Culling Games, even with Yuta actively participating in the same mission. Throughout his time in the series, Yuta has had many feats of strength, from fighting special grade sorcerer Suguru to even blitzing and taking damage from him despite only being in his first year as a student when tapping into Rika's power. When coming back later after spending a year training overseas, his first fight is with Itadori Yuji, who can box with one of the most durable special grade curses in the series. And Yuta kicks Yuji so hard that all of the breath leaves Yuji's body, with Rika, in her weakest form, being able to restrain Yuji as well. Yuta then moves on to Sendai Colony to fight 4 strong opponents that can pressure him, including a fighter named Ryu, whose strength forces Yuta to be on guard during their fight, or else he'll take serious damage, and Uro, who can shatter space on top of Yuta's body. Yuta then beats both of them in a free-for-all, despite starting the match without even having Rika active. Yuta also defeats a special grade cursed spirit named Kururushi, who both Uro and Ryu believe should have been able to one-shot Yuta altogether, with Yuta beating Kururushi with reverse curse technique and one-shotting the cursed spirit by outputting positive energy, showing that those at a special grade level are usually within Yuta's pay grade with a very small list of exceptions. Hakari's first fight ever shown in the series is against Itadori Yuji, who he didn't even take seriously, yet still beats down brutally with little effort. Despite the fact that Yuji was deliberately taking Hakari's punches, the damage was still very significant even in Yuji's own words, with Yuji not even being able to do damage to Hakari, despite him punching literal dents into special grade disaster curse Hanami, one of the most durable curses ever shown on screen. Hakari then takes on a fighter named Kashimo, who is leagues beyond anything that Yuji or Megumi would have been able to face, and even reacts to attacks that are considered to be undodgeable with his movement speed alone, showing that Hakari is clearly on a different level than many members of the main cast. Even if you want to highball Yuta by using the statement of him only being second to Satoru Gojo as a prodigy or with unusual abilities, depending on which translation you use, to say that he should be at that unrivaled level of Gojo and Sukuna, highballing Hakari based on Yuta's own statement of saying that Hakari is stronger than he is when he's on a roll, presumably with his jackpot ability, would still put them in the same general weight class. Although Yuta's statement about Hakari can be interpreted as modesty, as pointed out by Maki, meaning that Hakari may still be up there, but not objectively past Yuta as a whole. Or it could also be interpreted as Hakari having abilities that serve him better than Yuta's in certain situations, which we'll get into later. Even if you take Hakari's jackpot statement about having infinite curse energy and ignore all of the context surrounding the ability and curse energy as a whole, to say that Hakari should keep increasing in strength until he's destroying planets and universes with his bare hands, despite everyone in the series having a limit on how much curse energy they can output at one time, the only exceptions being binding vows and heavenly restrictions. Yuta, based on the many comparisons between the two of them, would still be in the same range as Hakari as well. Although I don't think that's what the author was trying to convey with the word infinite, as it seems to be an infinite supply of curse energy that he can use without running out, rather than him getting infinitely more powerful. On top of the fact that Hakari's opponents can even survive his attacks in the first place, when no one in the series is close to being some indestructible god that can tank infinitely powerful attacks, this kind of interpretation is very unlikely and should not be used. With Yuta and Hakari's strength out of the way, the biggest thing that's going to decide the fight between the two of them is their abilities. This is mainly going to revolve around their curse techniques, those being Hakari's pure love train, and Yuta's collection of curse techniques that he obtained with mimicry, along with his other abilities, making Yuta versus Hakari more about strategy rather than throwing one power level at another. With that being said, there are only a few abilities that would need to be used. Yuta's main curse technique is mimicry, where he stores the curse techniques that he collected from others as curse tools inside of Rika, a special grade vengeful spirit that's been attached to him since he was a child. With this, Yuta has collected many techniques, from the technique of Druve Toge Inumaki's cursed speech, Takako Uro's space-bending technique, and techniques that have yet to be named. Yuta also has a domain expansion, the ability to summon Rika for a total of 5 minutes, reverse curse technique, and the ability to output positive energy offensively to one-shot cursed spirits, while in the Jujutsu Kaisen Volume 0 movie, also having the ability to use the Black Flash. Out of these abilities, only a few are going to be a real threat to Hakari, and that's cursed speech and Rika's beam technique that Yuta and Rika use against Suguru and Ryu Ishigori. Hakari's pure love train has a focus around train doors in its base, but the main focus of Hakari's curse technique is his domain expansion, which gives him infinite curse energy and automatic reverse curse technique for 4 minutes and 11 seconds, making him unkillable for many characters in the series until his jackpot ends. This being the same ability that Yuta was likely referring to when he said that Hakari is even stronger than he is when he's on a roll. Both of these sets of abilities have the potential to threaten the other in combat. One of Yuta's biggest abilities in his fight against Hakari is cursed speech, where he can infuse his own words with curse energy and use them to directly affect his opponent. This can be used to do anything from stopping an opponent from moving, crushing them, twisting their bodies beyond recognition, commanding them to explode, and even outright having them die altogether. The ability is native to the Inumaki family, who experiences drawbacks when using the technique that causes them to take a rebound effect of damage to their own lungs the more powerful the word they use is, where the more powerful words can have so much of a rebound effect that they end up directly affecting the user as well. Although Yuta was able to copy cursed speech with his mimicry technique that he stores inside of Rika and takes out to use during her 5-minute manifestation period, and never shows himself being affected by any of these drawbacks at any point in time. By the time he uses cursed speech in Sendai Colony, he is using it a bit differently than he did in his fight against Suguru in Volume 0, where he switched from using a megaphone to having a cursed tool attached to his mouth, but still shows no negative effects, meaning that Yuta can basically use cursed speech to its maximum potential without any real issue, at least none that's been shown for him specifically. With cursed speech, this means that Yuta might be able to straight up blow up his opponent or have them die on the spot. This is especially useful against enemies that can use reverse curse technique, because as pointed out by Hajime Kashimo, a sorcerer brought back from the past, reverse curse technique finds its origins in the head, with poison and destroying the brain of a reverse curse technique user in a single attack being the best way to take them out. And with Yuta not experiencing any of the drawbacks that cursed speech would normally have, like doing damage to his own body, he should be able to use it pretty freely. What this means is that if Yuta, for example, wants to stop his opponent from moving and then jump them with Rika, that's completely on the table. What's also on the table is Yuta blowing up his opponents as long as they're on a similar or weaker level to him, with there being nothing that they can really do about it. The only known way to defend against cursed speech, despite it being around for what may be 1,000 years in the show's timeline, is to know that it's coming beforehand and defend both the ears and the brain with cursed energy. While this may sound like a simple thing, especially for someone who's familiar with Yuta's abilities, Takako Uro, who recognized cursed speech instantly when she saw the markings on Yuta's face, still wasn't able to react in time to defend herself in that way, with this also being pointed out by Momo Nishimaya as something that's difficult to do while focusing on other aspects of the fight. So if Yuta hit Hakari with his most dangerous versions of cursed speech, would he be able to kill Hakari? Yeah, pretty quickly actually. When Yuta uses his cursed speech commands telling Hakari to explode, it doesn't only blow up one body part, it makes the entire body explode all at one time. An explosion like this would include taking out Hakari's brain and every part of him all at the same time. This gets even more brutal when you consider that Yuta can command opponents to die outright with a single word. Even when taking into consideration that cursed speech is implied to take more curse energy being poured into words for stronger opponents, with Inumaki's fight against Hanami, Yuta has so much curse energy that when people sense him, they don't even think he has a limit. While he does in fact have one and can run out of curse energy, the fact that he has so much of it makes pouring enough curse energy into a single attack to take out someone that's on a similar level to him very within his range to do. As for why Yuta hasn't done this to any of his opponents, you could simply argue that the majority of the time, it either wasn't an option or it wasn't necessary. With Suguru, he was inexperienced with his own powers, and the cursed tool that he used for cursed speech faded away after a single use on a swarm of cursed spirits. Against Yuji, he didn't actually want to murder him and wanted to fake Yuji's death. Against Kawarushi, Rika wasn't around and he wanted to kill Kawarushi with his own means. And against Uro and Ryu, he didn't want them dead because he needed their points. With it being shown that he should be able to do this, it would be an option for him in a more serious fight, where his opponent is either at or below his level. Hakari's best ways to deal with this would be protecting his ears and his brain with cursed energy, as pointed out by Noritoshi Kamo during the Kyoto Exchange event. Although even Takako Uro, who has more experience as a fighter than Hakari, as an assassin, instantly recognized the cursed speech technique and was not able to defend herself in time, making Hakari doing the same very unlikely. The ability would completely go past Hakari's domain expansion, since the reverse curse technique that Hakari receives from his jackpot ability will be negged. Since with reverse curse technique originating from the head, cursed speech blowing up Hakari's entire body, including his brain, would stop Hakari's healing altogether. Hakari's best option after this becomes putting so much pressure onto Yuta that he's never able to bring out cursed speech from inside of Rika in the first place, which, as shown in Hakari's fight against Kashimo, fits Hakari's style very well. Although in any serious fight that Yuta's had in the series, he's always started with Rika manifested unless she was busy defending others or he didn't want to kill his opponent. So even with Hakari's high pressure fighting style, all Yuta would need to do is summon Rika from the very beginning, which is very in character for him to do, and take out his curse techniques as needed, making curse speech very deadly when used in this fight. Hakari does have impressive speed feats of reacting to lightning at close range that the series considers to be undodgeable for most characters. Although you have to remember that cursed speech isn't just sound or the speed of sound, it's sound that's enhanced by cursed energy, making the speed of cursed speech completely unknown, as it's never been dodged a single time that it was used. There have been numerous showings in the series of techniques getting more powerful or even faster when more cursed energy is poured into them. Prime examples of this being Sukuna's 10 Shadow Shikigami, who can compete at levels far higher than Megumi's when amped by Sukuna's strength. Taking that into account, even with how impressive Hakari's speed may be, Yuta, as someone who's at a similar level with quote-unquote boundless cursed energy, should be able to amp cursed speech to a level that can compete with Hakari, if not kill him altogether. Even if cursed speech would have originally not been on that level when used by Inumaki himself. Meaning that in the right situation, Yuta would literally look at Hakari, command him to explode, and blow him into tiny little pieces. Yuta's second win condition is his beam attack that he can use with Rika, the same attack that Yuta used to end special grade sorcerer Suguru Geto, although with the help of a binding vow to surpass the limits of cursed energy, and the same beam attack that he used to clash with Ryu, who could threaten Yuta with his cursed energy output and his physical strength. Yuta can only use this beam attack during the 5 minutes that Rika is fully manifested, where Yuta and Rika build up cursed energy together, which is then fired from Rika's body to damage her opponent. When fighting Ryu Ishigori, who could fire a blast of his own that would have been more powerful than Yuta's, Yuta rapidly built up the cursed energy to have the beam fire even faster than it normally would have. Using this beam, Yuta can blast and rip apart his enemies from mid-range, as long as Rika's around, making it highly effective against close-range fighters. The reason that this ability is important is because of how it works. If it's strong enough to rip through Hakari, it may just take his head off of his shoulders and kill him. During his fight against Suguru in Volume 0, Yuta, when amped by a binding vow, was able to rip the arm and a chunk of the torso off of Suguru's body, with the main reason that Yuta used this binding vow to attack Suguru in the first place being that Suguru mounted a maximum Uzumaki of more than 4,000 cursed spirits at the same time, Suguru at that time being one of the strongest sorcerers alive, with Yuta in base against Ryu during the Culling Games having a tie with Ryu's Granite Blast that was able to match if not slightly surpass Yuta's attack in strength. Rika can fire the attack entirely on her own without Yuta's assistance, although that does make the attack weaker, as Ryu points out himself in Sendai Colony. So with all that said, could Hakari survive if this hit him head on? Possibly. How strong this beam really is never really made clear, although there are a few routes that you could go with interpreting its strength. During Yuta's fight against Ryu Ishigori, Ryu counters it with a Granite Blast, which is said to be slightly stronger than Yuta's attack at its maximum. The Granite Blast, Ryu's signature technique, is used on Yuta several different times, who not only tanks it once, but multiple times throughout the same fight while Yuta remains in one piece. While it did force him to heal himself every time Ryu's Granite Blast was used, most. As Ryu points out, it was never strong enough to completely blow off any part of Yuta's body, to the point where Yuta even took one at point-blank range and even tanked a granite blast with his bare hands. Unless you think that Ryu's granite blast that he was going to counter Yuta with and their final beam struggle was stronger than all the ones that he used before, even though there's no direct evidence of that being the case, this would more than likely not be enough to take Hakari's head off of his body. So could Hakari survive if this beam attack hit him straight in the face? Yeah. Probably. Hakari, as mentioned before, is a character that's constantly alluded to being in the same general weight class as Yuta Okkotsu. So with Yuta tanking these granite blasts to the face and the body several times in a single fight and still being in one piece, Hakari should be able to do the same. And with Yuta being able to recover from these attacks by using reverse curse technique, Hakari's jackpot from his domain expansion should give him the same results, since his own reverse curse technique that he can only use when his jackpot is active would be fully automatic, letting Hakari heal from Yuta's attack right after it happens with no intervention on his part. When it comes to ripping body parts clean off of his opponents, Yuta and Rika's beam attack have only ever done this to a top-tier opponent when using a binding vow that would have sacrificed his own life in exchange for surpassing the limits of how much curse energy his body can put out at one time. So unless Yuta is ready to literally end his own life to blast Hakari off the face of the planet, he's not killing Hakari with this attack by any means. Even with Hakari being able to survive Yuta and Rika's beam attack, the odds of Yuta even being able to use it in the first place are low, as Hakari would likely never let Yuta get the attack off to begin with. Yuta and Rika's beam isn't like any of Yuta's other attacks where he can use them relatively quickly. Even in Yuta's standoff against Ryu in Sendai Colony, while Yuta did speed up the process of gathering curse energy to outpace Ryu, both Yuta and Ryu sat completely still while charging their attacks, which based on Hakari's fight against Kashimo is the exact opposite of what Hakari would do. Hakari as a fighter takes every opportunity to pressure his opponent that he can get, as there are hardly any breaks whatsoever in his fight against Kashimo, with him piling on the pressure by the second the moment that he sees the opportunity. With Yuta literally standing there charging up an attack from a distance, the odds of Hakari standing completely still and letting it charge to its max and then hit him are slim to none, with Hakari either moving out of the way or rushing Yuta to put an end to the charging attack altogether, making it unlikely that Yuta's beam would ever even touch Hakari to begin with. Hakari's biggest win condition is his domain expansion, Idle Death Gamble, where the rules of his domain are instantly transferred into his opponent's mind. During his domain expansion, a gamble is taken where if Hakari hits the jackpot, his body will be granted infinite cursed energy. This cursed energy then fuels Hakari by overflowing through his body so much that he gains access to automatic reverse curse technique for 4 minutes and 11 seconds, letting him heal from any physical injury that doesn't destroy his brain in a single shot. This is best shown in Hakari's fight against Kashimo, where after having his arm completely blown off of his body, Hakari's arm regenerates like nothing happened, shocking Kashimo as he says that Hakari has become unkillable except for 2 major conditions: poison, which Kashimo uses but Hakari recovers from, and destroying Hakari's brain in a single attack, which Kashimo failed to do. The main reason why Hakari's jackpot is so important is that if he's able to land this jackpot, not only does he gain access to infinite curse energy and automatic reverse curse technique for 4 minutes, but he can also refresh his domain expansion as soon as the timer ends, which he points out himself during his fight against Kashimo, meaning that Hakari, with the right conditions, can use his domain expansion over and over and over again to give himself repeated jackpots as long as he keeps landing the grand prize, which, thanks to Hakari's luck, is exactly what he does in his fights against Charles and Kashimo, to land his jackpot inside of his domain expansion at least 3 times in the same day. What this would effectively mean is that if Hakari keeps landing these jackpots, as he's been shown to do, he could simply outlast and beat Yuta by constantly regenerating until Yuta loses his connection to Rika and runs out of cursed energy, with Hakari's main strategy when doing this being beating Yuta by pushing him to exhaustion the same way that Uro and Ryu almost did in Sendai Colony, effectively forcing Yuta to outlast Hakari or to straight up lose. So would this be enough to take Yuta down? It's highly unlikely. Yuta does have at least one way of dealing with Hakari's domain expansion, as we've already gone over with his cursed speech. Although pushing Yuta to exhaustion would require a lot, especially for someone who's on a similar level to Yuta to begin with. You have to remember that during Yuta's fight against Uro and Ryu, and even Kururushi, even with them being as strong as they were, the only time that they ever pushed Yuta to use reverse curse technique was when they used their biggest moves, like Kururushi supposedly being able to one-shot Yuta with the festering life blade, Uro shattering space directly on top of his body, or Ryu hitting Yuta with a granite blast head-on. It took Yuta being hit with these moves a total of at least 8 times in a row to finally drain his curse energy pool to its limit by healing with reverse curse technique. Hakari, not having any game-changing attacks, at least none that he's shown, would have a very hard time pushing Yuta to that point with his raw strength alone, if they're meant to be equals in strength, especially when Yuta can not only refill his curse energy pool with Rika, but also summon a vengeful spirit that can fight alongside him and keep the pressure on Hakari for 5 minutes straight, which happens to outlast the total time for Hakari's jackpot. And after Rika's 5-minute timer ends, Hakari would have to push Yuta to his limit of curse energy by forcing him to heal 8 times in a row all over again. It's not a reliable way to look at the fight, but there's still more pieces to dealing with Hakari's domain expansion than just that. Yuta's biggest counter to Hakari's domain expansion is his own domain expansion, which no one has ever seen. In chapter 15 of Jujutsu Kaisen, in Gojo's fight against Jogo, the two are ready to clash with their domain expansions. During this fight, Gojo explains that when one domain is going to overtake another, there are 3 factors to take into account: how polished the domain expansion is, the compatibility of the domains. So for example, Jogo's fire-based domain should have a natural advantage over someone like Hanami, who's plant-based, and the amount of curse energy of each of the users. Hakari's domain expansion doesn't have any innate nature qualities to say that either he or Yuta would have some kind of compatibility advantage over the other. And with no one knowing what Yuta's domain even is, saying that his would be either more or less polished than Hakari's wouldn't make any sense either. However, with both Yuta and Hakari being on similar levels, he should at a bare minimum be able to interrupt Hakari's first domain expansion before Hakari even lands his jackpot ability, effectively making Hakari waste all of the curse energy that he used to cast his domain to begin with without ever getting the infinite curse energy refill that he would have gotten had his gamble paid off. And with Yuta being able to refill his curse energy, while Hakari's best option for doing the same would be taken away, Yuta would have an inherent advantage against Hakari's domain expansion, and may prevent Hakari from ever getting any benefit out of it to begin with, removing it from the equation altogether. With this, you can gather that Hakari may not ever be able to even use his domain expansion to begin with, as not only can Yuta stop Hakari's domain from even reaching the point where he can take advantage of it, he can also kill him through the domain itself, even if it does work, while having enough pressure through being a strong opponent for Hakari on his own, and then coupling that with a vengeful spirit who can pressure Hakari on top of that to make it even more difficult for him to have time to cast his domain to begin with. All of the situations for Hakari's domain playing a big role in their fight are not working in Hakari's favor, as Yuta is basically a hard counter to Hakari in terms of their abilities, even if Hakari is strong enough to be on his level, or even better than him at fighting certain kinds of opponents. The fight based on that basically comes down to this: Yuta is able to kill Hakari with cursed speech by completely blowing up his entire body, including his brain, to the point where Hakari would never recover, even with his jackpot active. Hakari would be able to survive Yuta and Rika's combined beam attack that they used against Ryu, as long as there's no sacrificial binding vow like the one that they used against Suguru, with Hakari ultimately being able to pressure Yuta out of being able to charge the technique to begin with, or even being quick enough to dodge it altogether. If Hakari does try to use his domain, Yuta can negate it by casting his own, effectively wasting Hakari's cursed energy, while Yuta, through Rika, still ultimately has the ability to replenish his own, putting Hakari at a severe disadvantage and giving Yuta an undeniable upper hand, putting the fight heavily in Yuta's favor, as he can counter Hakari at pretty much every turn, despite them being relative to one another in strength. Another interesting point in this discussion is that one of the techniques that Yuta gained in Sendai Colony was the technique of Takako Uro. In Uro's fight against Yuta, Uro warps the space around Yuta's body to completely bypass his guard and hit him in a way that he would have blocked normally. This is on top of Uro bending space around Yuta yet again to force him to miss an attack that would have landed when the attack was sent out. And with this technique being in Yuta's hands, all of these options would be available to him, meaning that Yuta, when using Uro's technique, can basically stop Hakari from ever hitting him the entire time that Rika's active, if the fight comes down to hand-to-hand combat, while also depending on how well Yuta uses this technique to his advantage, meaning that depending on how well he uses it, if the fight comes down to hand-to-hand combat, Yuta could give himself an advantage by making it that much harder for Hakari to hit him, along with it being even easier for him to damage Hakari by bypassing his guard in ways that Hakari hasn't dealt with in any of his recent fights. Hakari is an intelligent character, so you could argue that he would adjust to this, although how quickly that would happen is up for debate. As when Yuta figured out what was happening against Uro, this method of using her technique wasn't applied again, and we never got to see how that adjustment period would happen, if it would even happen at all, giving Yuta yet another advantage in this fight, even if it's only temporarily. Going off of Yuta's statement about Hakari being even stronger than he is when he's on a roll, which presumably means landing multiple jackpots, when breaking down how a fight between the two of them would go, it makes it clearer that this more than likely meant that Hakari would be more adept at handling different kinds of opponents that Yuta may struggle with, due to how long Hakari can preserve himself compared to Yuta, who would eventually run out of curse energy over time, giving Hakari different strengths that would make him better suited for different kinds of fights, rather than him being outright stronger than Yuta by direct comparison in a one-on-one. This can also be seen in other series like Naruto, where Sasuke is said to be an equal to Hokage Naruto, while Naruto still had Kurama and Sasuke still had his Rinnegan. Yet when looking at their fight in the Valley of the End in Naruto Shippuden, it was clear by the way that the fight actually played out that Naruto's abilities hard countered Sasuke's, regardless of how close they were in power. Yuta and Hakari are essentially the same situation. They may be close in strength, but in terms of ability, Yuta does come out on top if they ever were to go all out, especially in a fight to the death, which is very in line with Maki's own interpretation that Yuta being weaker than Hakari was a false statement, at least in a direct sense. Another example that backs up this point is Todo, the strongest of the Kyoto students, who directly calls out Yuta Okkotsu before the exchange event, saying that he would beat Megumi half to death and drag out Yuta Okkotsu, or at least the third year. The third year in this call-out being Hakari himself, with Todo, who seems to be familiar with the both of them, even making it clear that he sees Yuta as the bigger fish in this scenario, saying he'll drag out Yuta, or at least Hakari, directly implying that he views Yuta as being stronger, or at the very least, more dangerous or a bigger challenge. And while Gojo does point out that both Yuta and Hakari have the potential to rival him in the future, that doesn't speak to their direct strength in the present moment, as the characters that have met both of them in the series all seem to agree that Yuta is above Hakari when comparing one to the other, solidifying Yuta as the one that would come out on top in a one-on-one even further. That is the end of Yuta versus Hakari. This is a heavily debated topic and has been for quite some time now. If you like content like this, make sure to subscribe, as there will be plenty more of them in the coming future. I do have some pretty big projects planned, so if you enjoyed this, then you'll want to be around for those as well. Make sure to like the video if you enjoyed yourself, and I will see you next time.